In the video of the suite in B-flat minor by Mikhail Bulyovsky, I mentioned that it's highly unusual for its time. Key signature was what attracted me to it in the first place, but also that precisely because of its key signature, it posed a problem when it came to choosing a temperament. My hypothesis, and it is only a hypothesis, is that because Bulyovsky advocated a division of the octave into 31 notes, this suite may have been intended for a keyboard instrument with 31 notes to an octave. This division allows each accidental to have an individual key assigned to it, so that we have separate keys for what we would nowadays call enharmonic notes. In other words, F sharp and G flat, for instance, would be assigned two separate keys rather than being lumped together into one. This in turn allows for more pure intervals without the compromises that affect a standard keyboard tuned to quarter comma meantone, and also ensures that all 5 flats of the key signature are present. When I posted the video in the harpsichord group on Facebook, a member of the group suggested that one thing I could try to do in terms of temperament would be modifying standard quarter comma meantone by taking the 3 sharp accidentals and changing them to flats, so that all 5 accidental keys would correspond to flats, and therefore all 5 flats of the key signature of B-flat minor would be available. And I will explain in a minute exactly how all of this works during the course of the video. I thought this was an intriguing proposition, and so I have finally decided to make a new video exploring this idea and also showing you how modifying a temperament actually works. First, a little background. Quarter comma meantone is built around the principle of having as many pure major thirds as possible. However, as I have explained before, maintaining pure major thirds and pure perfect fifths is a challenge, because each of those intervals creates a different and in some respects opposing problem. Pure major thirds result in octaves that are too narrow, while pure perfect fifths result in octaves that are too wide. As out-of-tune octaves are not acceptable to the ear, something else has to be modified, and what this means is that we have to temper the thirds and the fifths. In other words, slightly change them from their pure ratio by narrowing them or widening them in some way, so that the octaves will be pure. But you can imagine that as thirds and fifths are pulling the octave in 2 different directions, maintaining the purity of one of those intervals at the expense of the other can create its own set of problems. This is indeed one of the issues with quarter comma meantone temperament, which contains 8 pure major thirds. This emphasis on the thirds means that the fifths need to be narrowed by quite a bit, and because this would not sound particularly pleasant, all but one of the fifths are narrowed a little less, so that the discrepancy is not problematic to the ear. Now this leaves the remaining fifth unbearably wide. This is usually the fifth between A flat and E flat, only it's really a diminished sixth between G sharp and E flat, the so-called wolf fifth. It's this one. So now you have to keep in mind, this key here is not both G sharp and A flat. It's just G sharp, and this key is just E flat, not D sharp. So this is why this is actually a diminished sixth rather than some sort of a fifth. In other words, as I have said before, Keep in mind, there are no enharmonic equivalents here, so each accidental key has only one function. So the accidental keys in quarter comma mean tone correspond only to the notes C sharp, E flat, F sharp, G sharp, and B flat. So that the enharmonic equivalents of D flat, D sharp, G flat, A flat, and A sharp do not exist in standard quarter comma mean tone. Another problem that arises is that having 8 major thirds pure results in the 4 remaining thirds being too wide because they're really diminished fourths and therefore also not particularly pleasing to the ear. So what I mean by this is that if you look, for example, at this major third, you would think, okay, well, this is D flat to F. However, in this standard quarter comma mean tone temperament, this is a C sharp. So we have a C sharp to F, not D flat to F, and therefore you have this very wide third. The same thing can happen here because we have F sharp and B flat. And 2 more of these. So this one, G sharp to C, and this one, B to E flat. However, all of this is usually forgiven for those 8 glorious pure thirds, as well as the wonderfully spicy chromatic scale that results from the fact that semitones are not equidistant. So I've played the not so pleasant aspects of quarter comma mean tone, but then we have these beautiful pure major thirds, and then we also have this really wonderfully spicy chromatic scale. And you can tell the half steps, the semitones, are not equidistant. And indeed, as long as one stays away from keys with more than a couple of accidentals, these limitations will not really cause any problems. Additionally, a composer familiar with the peculiarities of quarter comma mean tone can venture in some of these forbidden or problematic tonalities as a means of heightening expression or even expressing poignant or heart-wrenching feelings. A wonderful example, I would say, is Louis Coupren's Pavan in F sharp minor, which I have recorded twice in the past, although I prefer the latter of the 2 versions. Now, any which way you look at it, B flat minor is definitely a step, or perhaps several steps, too far for quarter comma mean tone. There will be a demonstration later in the video. And indeed, one of the main reasons musicians started modifying quarter comma mean tone or using a different approach in finding other temperaments by the end of the 17th century had to do with expanding the spectrum of available tonalities. One word of caution before we proceed. For many modern musicians used to the bland uniformity of equal temperament, quarter comma mean tone may at first sound strange, even in its available tonalities. What I'm trying to suggest is that if something sounds unfamiliar, or if, for instance, a piece contains an accidental that doesn't actually exist in mean tone, that doesn't necessarily mean that the temperament needs to be modified or that we should switch to a different temperament altogether. Composers who knew the ins and outs of quarter comma mean tone used its colors for expressive purposes, so the occasional strangeness or what I like to call spiciness, is oftentimes part of the intended effect. So what I'm doing here in this video is simply experimenting, but with an admittedly experimental piece. The problem here is not the occasional non-existent note, but rather that three notes that belong to the key signature of B flat minor, namely D flat, G flat, and A flat, are not available in quarter comma mean tone. So what I will do is modify the temperament by taking the three sharp accidentals, namely C sharp, F sharp, and G sharp, and retuning them to the missing flats. I'll briefly show you how this is done. Then we'll have a short intermission while I retune the spinet. I need a bit of concentration to do it properly. And then I'll demonstrate the changes. Finally, I will perform the Allemande from Buliowski's suite in B flat minor. First in standard quarter comma mean tone, and then in my modified version. So let me show you what I'm going to do, and then I will go on and tune the spinet. So keep in mind here, I've mentioned this before and I will say it one more time now, that the 5 accidental keys that we have, what we actually have is F sharp, G sharp, B flat, C sharp, and E flat. And in case you're wondering why they decided on this particular arrangement of sharps and flats, keep in mind that what they're doing is actually quite logical. If you think about the key signatures with sharps, for instance, the first 3 sharps that we have are F, C, and G. In other words, the ones that you find here. And if we go the other direction with the flats, the first 2 flats that we get are B flat and E flat. In other words, again, the 2 flats that we have here. So what this means is that if you're using standard quarter comma mean tone, you have all the notes that you need for C major, and then in the direction of sharps, G major, D major, and A major, and in the direction of flats, F major and B flat major. Technically speaking, you also have their relative minors, but keep in mind this is a little trickier in the sense that minor scales have 3 different forms. So in addition to the natural form, we have the harmonic and the melodic form, and there we have to raise either just the 7th degree of the scale or the 6th and the 7th. So then suddenly you start getting to some pitches that you might not actually have. But at any rate, what they have done here is to be able to play C major and then the keys with a few sharps and a few flats. And the further away you move from C major, the more problematic it becomes. So what we're going to do is that I will take the sharps, the 3 sharps, and I will make them into flats. And let me show you what happens and how this is going to work. I don't think I can do it perfectly while talking at the same time. This is why I want to take a little time later and tune the spinet. But I think I can approximate well enough what I want to do, and then you will see what's happening. So in other words, now we have this accidental key here, which is G sharp, and we want to make it into an A flat. Now keep in mind, the reason we have this as a G sharp is because you can get a really nice pure major third here. So we have a very beautiful E major chord. Now we're going to lose that. Once this becomes flat, you won't be able to play an E major chord anymore because you will not have G sharp. So what happens is, here is your pure major third, And here is your wide major third, or more technically a diminished fourth, because it's in between G sharp and C, not A flat and C. So this is the nice one, and this is the not so nice one. So what I need to do now is kind of reverse this relationship, so that now this is not going to sound good and this will sound good. So all I have to do really is to loosen the note a little bit. So now I have to take this and I have to make it into a pure major third. So a real A flat to C. So what has happened now is that now I have an A flat. So this sounds nice, and this doesn't sound nice anymore. So I've kind of reversed the relationship here. So now the A flat means that this, I don't have an E major chord anymore, but I do have an A flat major chord. So obviously E major is probably more useful than A flat major, at least if you're thinking in terms of the 17th century. So what I will do now is do the exact same thing to the remaining sharp accidentals, so that everything is going to be a flat accidental. So if you will allow me, I will take some time to tune the entire spinet now to this modified quarter comma meantone temperament, and when I've done that, I will return with more demonstration, and then also you get to hear the Allemande from the Buliowski suite performed both in standard meantone temperament and this modified quarter comma meantone. So the spinet is now tuned where all of the accidental keys, all 5 of them, are tuned to flats, and in a little bit you're going to actually listen to the performance of the Buliowski Allemande. Just a few things that I wanted to say before we get to that. First of all, what has changed here is that, and if you will allow me to consult my cheat sheet, what has happened here now is that, of course, the pure major thirds are different, but also the 4 very wide thirds are different. There's one that's still the same one. This one, B to D sharp, which of course is B to E flat. So this one is the same like in standard quarter comma meantone. However, we have 3 more really wide thirds: D to F sharp, E to G sharp, and A to C sharp. So you can see what is happening here, that basically with this kind of modification, our basic keys with sharps in their key signature are no longer playable. So I can't do this anymore. D to F sharp, E to G sharp, and of course, as I mentioned, A to C sharp. But on the other hand, we have pure major thirds where we didn't have pure major thirds before. So now we have a true A flat to C, for instance. This is fine. And also the whole fifth between G sharp and E flat doesn't exist anymore. Now we have a wonderful fifth there, because we have both an A flat and an E flat. So you can actually play a very nice E flat major chord now. However, the wolf has now shifted to a different place. Now it's between B and F sharp, because of course we don't have an F sharp anymore, it's a G flat, so there's your diminished sixth. So this is definitely a modification that favors flat keys, and of course this makes sense because B flat minor has 5 flats. So obviously I would say this would be of a much more limited usage, especially during the 17th century, given that I honestly don't know of any other piece that is in B flat minor. So I only know this Buliovsky suite. So I hope you can see why they had originally chosen the standard quarter comma mean tone. And obviously you can have other more gentle modifications. You don't have to go as extreme as what I did. But obviously, as I mentioned before, I am experimenting with an admittedly experimental piece. So what you're going to listen to now is 2 different performances of the Allemande from Buliovsky's suite in B flat minor. The first time around, it's going to be in standard quarter comma mean tone, and I am not going to take the repeats on that. So I'll just play each section once. And I think when you hear it, you will know why I would not want to actually repeat anything. The second time, you will hear the performance of the Allemande in this modified quarter comma mean tone. I am not going to tell you my feelings about it. I will let you decide how you like this temperament with this piece, and also if you want to compare, my original recording used the Rameau temperament that I tend to like for a lot of repertory. So if you're curious, you can go back and listen to that performance in Rameau and compare it to the one where I have modified this. And as always, keep in mind, we don't know what Buliovsky would have done. So we don't know why he chose this particular key, this particular tonality. It doesn't really make sense for 17th century standards. So as always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the performances.